Secrets My Father Kept is about, it's set in the eve of World War II. So it's set in Poland in 1939. And it's about an inquisitive and intelligent young woman called Marie, who is looking for her missing mother, who disappeared 15 years ago. And standing in her way is her secretive father, who refuses to talk about what happened. And so the book opens on an afternoon when Marie, the daughter, is breaking into her father's bedroom, and she's looking for clues on her mother. So it begins with Chapter 1, Floorboards. Krakow, Poland, February 1939. As Marie prepared to break into her father's bedroom, she felt a little pool of guilt welled up inside her for betraying him. Her patriarch was a respected man in town who kept to himself and attended church 8 times a week, every morning and twice on Sundays. He possessed no interests beyond the rapture of the Blessed Sacrament and studying the reproductive habits of bacteria. He did not deserve such disrespect from his only daughter. But, unfortunately, the burning desire to find something, anything, about her mother had become irrepressible for Marie. And on that Wednesday afternoon, as the rain made lovely fat spatters on the cobblestones outside, was as good a time as any to betray him. So what happens in this chapter is Marie goes ahead and betrays her father. She breaks into his bedroom, which he always keeps locked, and she discovers something a little bit disgusting and a little bit horrific, which I won't tell you. And I'll read you the final couple of paragraphs of chapter 1. So she's found the thing that she found in her father's bedroom, and now she's reflecting on it. Marie had gone into her father's bedroom, hoping for some morsel of information that would have allowed her to say to the neighbours that her mother had left for a virtuous reason, that they could remove the stain from Marie's character of her mother's absence that her mother's absence had made. But now, faced with this real piece of her mother, instead of satisfying the craving to gain propriety in front of the townsfolk, she had created a new one, 100 times worse. A cave of longing had opened up in her. She'd set a monster loose. The discovery of this thing, so macabre and strange, so unexpected, changed things. She could never go back to the way things were. She now put aside her concern for finding the reason her mother had left and focused instead on actually finding her instead. If Marie Carsker knew then how much she would come to learn over that year of 1939, she might have wished for something different. But now she felt confident of one thing only. She would not stop until she learned what had happened to her mother.
And there sets up the mystery.
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. You've described the novel as being a feminist fairy tale, although it's a historical setting. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, I'm fascinated by the idea of women in work. My first novel, Jane in Love, is about Jane Austen, and she time travels to the present day and falls in love with a modern day man. And Jane Austen, in her real life, never married or had any children. And it's this great irony that the queen of love stories herself died a spinster. So anyway, this Jane character, she travels to the present day, she falls in love with this guy, and she finds herself so happy she decides to stay. As soon as she decides to stay, all her books begin disappearing from the shelves. And she realises the longer she stays, the more that her books will disappear until eventually Jane Austen disappears. So she has to decide whether she's going to stay in the present where she's found love and she's happy, or if she's going to return to her own time and write her books and become Jane Austen. And I read Jane Austen as a teenager and just loved her. And I grew fascinated by her biography, and I was shocked to discover that she never married or had any children. You know, the writer of these beautiful love stories herself died a spinster. And I was considering a career as a writer myself at the time, and so I looked up the biographies of other writers who I admired, you know, the Bronte sisters, Emily Dickinson, Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Women, and so on. All of these women either had disastrous romantic lives or none at all. And I began to wonder, does an artist, namely a female one, need to be single in order to create art? And if Jane Austen had to choose between the heart and the pen, what would she choose? And that's how my first novel, Jane in Love, was born. When I was editing Jane in Love, I was really getting into this idea of women in work. What are the sacrifices that women have to make towards relationships and family if they want to pursue a career? These days, it's difficult, but in those days, it was impossible. And when I was editing Jane in Love, I began to think, what are some other times in history in which I can examine this idea of women in work? And that's where Secrets My Father Kept came from. And so I call it a feminist fairy tale, and as Jane in Love is a feminist fairy tale, because they're both stories of women who are essentially sort of superheroes trying to do something heroic in the area of work, trying to have ambition and pursue a career in a patriarchal society, really.
Thank you. As well as feminism, there are other contemporary themes weaved throughout the book. The role of religion in society and interfaith marriages, self-acceptance, consent even, sexism, of course, and political ideology. Why was it important to you to write about these issues but set them in that historical context?
I think World War II is so the book's set in 1939 on the eve of World War II. And I think this was a real watershed moment for modern history, if you will. And this was the first time in which women were thrown into the workforce en masse. Women were needed to work in the factories and to, ammunition factories. Women were nurses. Women were building tanks. Women were doing the maths on the Enigma machines, and the dignity of earning a wage that came with that. Once women had a taste for that, there was no going back, really. And I see World War II as really the beginning of the great feminist movements of the 20th century. So I thought, if I'm going to write another book about this issue of women in work, I'd set it in World War II, because I find it's such an interesting moment for women. And like we were discussing before, women never really got a look in World War II history before, but now we seem to be focusing on it a lot more, which I think is great.
Perhaps we can talk about that then, that the female characters, Marie and Helena, are strong and determined, intelligent and fierce. And I presume that then was when you've explained that was a deliberate choice to talk about the women's stories, which are often overlooked. So perhaps you can just expand on that. There seems to be a trend with Heather Morris and other novels coming out, or works of nonfiction to really portray the women's side of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Marie, as well as trying to find her mother, Marie wants to be a doctor like her father. So the secretive father of the title, Dominic, is this very well-respected doctor in town. The book opens, the first time we meet Dominic, he's saving the life of a young boy with sort of a rudimentary version of penicillin that he's sort of developed himself. So he's this brilliant doctor that everybody really respects in town. Marie, it becomes quite clear that Marie has inherited his brilliance. She's very much as smart as him, and she wants to be a doctor too, like him. And she encounters tremendous opposition from society, from her father, from everybody really, for pursuing this dream. There's even a point at which she tries to enter university, and they tell her they're not going to waste a place on her, basically. They say, there's no point in us taking you, because you're just going to go off and have children, and you're going to leave the profession, and then we look silly because we wasted a university place on you. And I that didn't come from nowhere. There was a story which broke about maybe 2 years ago of a Japanese university, or universities, which for years have been doctoring results of the entrance examinations for medicine of women wanting to study medicine. And they were very straight up about it. They said, well, we're not going to waste places on people, on students who are just going to leave the profession to start a family. And, you know, it's a sort of, it's not as bad today, but it's sometimes it's still up there. So it was very important for me to put a highlight on such issues, really, on the difficulty of pursuing a career if you're a woman.
So I want to talk a little bit about the research. Obviously, that story you've just told us about the Japanese universities is a reasonably contemporary story, but research is a huge part of any novelist's work when you're writing, but particularly with the historical genre. And I noticed when I read the book, the dedication to all the small details, like the clothing, especially that Highland outfit you talk about at the beginning when they're going to a dance, all the medical references and the chemistry, all the equations, even for the entrance exam, and the pharmaceutical references, and the living conditions in the ghettos. How important was it for you to get those aspects right? And if you get it wrong, what are the consequences and the weight of responsibility around, particularly when you're setting it, knowing that the Holocaust was about to happen and the terrible events of World War II? Were you conscious of that when you were writing?
Yes, I was. That's a great question. So I think research can only take you so far. I think you need to do a little bit of research to start with, and then you just need to tell your story. And then once you've told the story and you've got the beginning and you've got the ending how you want it to be, then I think you go back and you find the research to make it work. There was one thing that I didn't want to get wrong, and that was the depictions of Judaism. At the time that I'm writing in Krakow in 1939, Krakow was 30% Jewish. And as we all know, they had a terrible time of it afterwards. So I consulted with several Jewish consultants and historians, and to make sure that the depictions of Judaism were not accurate, because I don't think you need to be accurate. I think you need to be true. You need to be true to the culture, and you need to be true to the things that actually happened. But also, that was a very important thing for me as well, is not to say, well, how does a Polish person act, and how does a Jewish person act? Because that's not right either, because Jewish people don't act a certain way and Polish people don't act a certain way. There's elements of Jewish culture and there's elements of Polish culture that you can depict. But as it comes to the individual person acts according to their temperament and their personality and their brain and their upbringing. So I very much did not want to portray I didn't want to portray any stereotypes, put it that way. But the actual research of this was a lot of fun. I went to Krakow in my 20s as a backpacker, And I thought, oh, isn't this a wonderful, spooky city? It's sort of really old and gothic, and it's got this really bloody history. And the buildings are so beautiful, and Polish people can be so melancholy and so poetic, and they're so kind to strangers. Like hospitality is very important in Polish culture. And I thought, if ever I'm going to set a novel in World War II, I'll set it in Krakow. And so then once I decided that I was going to write six, my father kept, I went back to Poland a few times, went back in the summer, went back in the winter, and went to Krakow and Warsaw, some Prussian towns, Zakopane, which is a beautiful ski resort. And I visited the Jewish quarters and lots of apothecaries and Auschwitz concentration camp. And then when I was in Melbourne as well, I started studying Polish, and my Polish teacher worked as a consultant on the novel as well. So he was very good at telling me about the Highland costumes and the formality in Poland. They're very formal. Like their culture is very formal. So you always call somebody Mister. It's very intimate to call someone by their first name. Yeah.
So did you have to have like a sensitivity or a cultural sensitivity reading, given, because I wondered whether you were actually Jewish yourself or of that background, because of that the strength of the depiction in the prose. Was it read so that you were, as you said, true and authentic to the voices of the people? Was that something you were aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went to there's a fabulous museum called Jewish Holocaust Centre in Elstonwick, near where I live in Melbourne. And I went down there and did a tour with a Holocaust survivor, and he was a lovely man who was in Warsaw, and I think he was 5 when World War II broke out, and he was hidden in a cupboard. That's how he described it, hidden in a cupboard for 5 years, basically. And then it was sort of passed through various families and do-gooders, and then when his mother came to pick him up at the orphanage in sort of 1947, he didn't want to go, he didn't recognise her, and it was so lovely hearing his story, because it was just a human story, and that's what I was looking for in the novel. But then also understanding that it's if you're going to tell a story like this, you have a responsibility to bear witness to the things that actually happened. And so it was very important for me, once I'd got those sort of human stories, was to actually go back and show the novel to some Jewish consultants and say, please read this and let me know what you think, and what you think is not true, and we'll change it so that we've got a really authentic portrayal here.
Fabulous. Obviously, with the historical setting and the Second World War, and you touch on the First World War as well, there's some highly emotive and distressing references that comes out in the dialogue, and things that happen to the characters. Obviously, you're talking about Nazis and this terrible sexist attitude that made me want to punch walls when I was reading it, and the religious dogma and bigotry. How does it make you feel when you write that? You talked about staying true to character, and we had an author talk earlier in this the week, and she talked about method writing. So as opposed to acting, where she literally steps in the shoes of her characters and does all the things that those characters would do, so that she can personally feel it. How do you feel when you have to write that and put your characters in those situations? And what do you do to cope with the emotions that arise when you've had to write a particularly horrific scene?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, like I was saying before, it's there's a responsibility to bear witness. If you're going to write about them, then write them true, because then you're bearing witness. And I think it was very important to me to show these things because this is how it was. And yeah, this is how it was. So it was very important to write those things, how they happened, and use the research. And I think once you have written it, I think it's done then. And it's very easy to walk away once it's actually been written, because then you go into the editing process, and then you read it and you go, well, I've read this 20 times now, and it. And
your poor characters.
yeah, that's
They're
right.
the ones who have to suffer on the page.
I'm fine.
Walk away.
Yeah, exactly.
We've talked a bit about the female characters, but there are some strong male characters too. Marie's father, Dominic, and his spirited and privileged friend, Johnny, like chalk and cheese. How do you build up those characters and make them relatable, male or female? But Johnny just sprang from the page. So you needed some light relief from
yes. Yeah, exactly. I think it's always important, and I should have said that in the last question, which is when you write something harrowing, it's important to have a bit of balance in the book. You've always got to temper the dark with the light. That's what makes life interesting, really. I think there's actually a bit at the end where Dominic says there'll always be dark and light in the world, and the aim is always to have just that little bit more light than dark, if you can manage it. And I loved writing Johnny. Johnny is in screenwriting. So my background, my day job is as a screenwriter, and in film and TV, a character like Johnny is what we call a magnificent bastard, a swashbuckling. I always imagined if there's going to be a movie of this, that he'd be played by like a cheeky Brad Pitt or something, when he was in Fight Club or something. And he's always a guy like Johnny is always the one with the clever line, and all the ladies love him. But these characters, these magnificent bastards, have always got a little bit of darkness in them, always a little bit of sadness in them. And they're always magnificently handsome. So, no, I had great joy writing Johnny, and I think he works very well. It was very enjoyable writing him in scenes with Dominic, because Dominic, like you said, the chalk and cheese Dominic is so buttoned up and straight-laced and so guarded. And I feel like every time I wrote them, it was very easy to see why they would become very firm friends.
It's a huge storyline, like an epic saga that spans generations and 2 world wars, with twists and turns. And I wondered whether you'd set out to write it that way, or whether diving down your research rabbit holes had given you extra plot lines to take, and whether you had and without giving anything away, whether you knew you were writing that you were going to reach that end point.
Yes. So I had so for the readers, there is a twist at the end of Secrets My Father Kept. Well, at the end of the novel, Marie finds out what happens to her mother, and when I was sort of putting it together, I realised that at some point, if we wanted to get a picture of what Marie's mother is to her, if we're going to fall in love with this character, we need to see her. So instead of showing her in the present day of the narrative, which would sort of give the game away, really, if we already know what happened to her, I decided that the best way to set up her character was to show what she was like before she disappeared. So then it kind of worked out quite neat. The main storyline is set in 1939, And the storyline, the flashbacks of Marie's mother, Helena, is set in 1918 at the end of World War One. And so that was great because what you get with World War II in Europe is that in 1939, Europe is still licking its wounds from World War One. Imagine like it's like the same as if we were now, and we're all remembering a war that happened at the beginning of the 2000s, and this was a war in which 30 million people died. So it was great to be able to put them both in, and I think it was nice to have those two sort of parallel storylines. And it was a good way for me to be able to set up this character of Marie's mother.
So I presume you plan your writing? So
yes, what are the two, a pantser or a plotter, they say. I plot a little bit, but like I said, my day job's in screenwriting, and with the screenwriting, I think I've had it drilled into me that is, you've got to have a structure, you've got to have a structure set up, ready to go, because in 10 minutes there's going to be a meeting with a producer and the network, and they're going to ask you what happens in the end and what happens in the middle. So if you've got all that already organised in your head, it's all the better for you. So I usually plot a little bit. I know what the ending's going to be always, and then I usually am able to go in and fill in the gaps quite easily just from my head because of my screenwriting training.
Yeah. The idea of family and the lengths people will go to protect loved ones really shines out in this novel. Marie, Dominic and Helena make sacrifices, as you mentioned earlier, in the name of love, risking life-changing consequences. I wondered if that was something that came from deep within you. I know you talked earlier about that idea of women at work and the sacrifices they made, but how important is family to you, and were you able to sort of imbue your words with your ethics, I guess?
Yes, that's a great question. So I recently became a mother, and I come from a long line of very strong women, and I come from a very close family, and I'm very lucky to have that. And I also found that when researching it, that both in Poland in general and in Jewish culture as well, family is really the cornerstone of life. And when we're talking about women work and ambitious women wanting to pursue a career, these women don't want to not have children. They want to have both. And family is as important to women as a career is, as it is for men as well. I think we just don't let men see it as important. But so it felt very natural for it to be a story about a daughter who is looking for her mother. And as we go through the story, we get to see the sacrifices that Helena, her mother, made to save Marie's life. Really. Have you seen? Have you seen Mayor of Easttown?
Not yet.
Oh,
it's on the very long
list. Everybody watch it. It's brilliant. If you want to watch something about people like doing anything to protect their family, yeah, that's great.
And you get Kate Winslet as a bonus too.
Yes, yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah. You chose to end the story at the precipice of World War II. That was a conscious choice, I presume. And without giving away the ending, have you imagined the characters during the war and after? Was that something you had in your mind when you were getting to that end point?
Yes, I have. Towards the end, and this isn't giving anything away, they all there is a conversation which goes, if we are going to get out of this place, if we're going to get out of Europe, we want to get to the furthest place we can from this hellhole, really. And the furthest place for people in Poland at the time, and this is something that my Polish teacher told me, was Australia. Australia was this sort of land of milk and honey fantasy place. And what, they speak English there? What is English? You know, and so if we ever get out of here, we're going to get to Australia. And so I like to imagine what would have happened to the characters if they made it to Australia, or if the war caught them before they could get out.
And despite the difficult subject matter, there is a romance. Yes. In the book. Is that a choice you make? We spoke a little bit earlier about trying to lighten the tone with characters and some humour because it's so harrowing, but that's a conscious choice you make. And is a romance going to be something that features in all of Rachel Givney's novels?
I'm a sucker for a love story, I have to say. Well, I think, Secrets My Father Kept, it's a coming-of-age story, really. This is really what it is about at its essence, is a 17-year-old girl discovering how the world works. And along the way, she meets a beautiful Jewish man who was her best friend when she was growing up, and she hasn't seen him for 10 years. And she was never out of love with him, really, but falls back in love with him straight away. And they have a lovely romance, and then they have to decide if they're going to get married, because she's Catholic and he's Jewish, and that didn't really work in those days. So, but yes, I'm a sucker for a love story.
Good. So you spoke earlier about Jane in Love, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about that. You already answered how you came up with the premise for the book. Yeah. But when you're writing somebody as high profile as Jane Austen, how do you do that? How do you bring her into a contemporary setting without raising literary eyebrows? Were you really aware that you had to get it right, or were you just prepared to, take the hits of people who may have a different view about what she would be like if you stuck her in 21st century Bath in the middle of the making of Northanger Abbey?
Yeah. I think I remember reading Emma Thompson saying this once, because she wrote the screenplay for Sense and Sensibility, and I said, "Oh, what did you feel about taking on the giant Jane?" And I think Emma said, "Oh, she's dead. She'll be fine. She'll get over it." She sold 20 million copies of her books, but I really did go to it with the idea again of bearing witness. If I'm going to portray Jane Austen, then even though she's in the 21st century and she's learning to ride an escalator and so on and so forth, is to portray her true. So I started with reading all of her novels and all of her juvenilia and critiques on her work, which was very enjoyable. But the main source of information that I got, the essence of her, I think, was from her letters. These letters weren't written with the idea of that they're going to be published one day. These are intimate letters that she wrote to her sister and to her mother. And at times she's wickedly funny in these. At other times she's just really sad. And you can see there's periods in her life where she quite clearly went through a depression, and there are times in her life where she was in love and it didn't work out. And they were wonderful to read, because she's quite an enigma in the way that we talk of her, because so little was written about her at the time, because she was a woman. And but in her letters, you get a real sense of the real Jane. And so I used that as my base for how I was going to portray her. And after reading everything that she'd written in all her letters, and I sort of came to the conclusion that she was a much beloved aunt. She was a great friend, and she was very warm, but she was also very insolent, and she was a complex woman. She was a human being. Yeah.
So you're now turning that novel into a screenplay.
Yes.
I just wanted you to have a chat about how that was going, and what are the differences between writing a novel and writing a screenplay, and the similarities as well.
Yeah, great question. I did a novel writing course when I decided that I wanted to write a novel. And the main thing that I learned there was that the difference between writing a screenplay and writing a novel, aside from the fact that one is about a tenth the size of the other, is that you have to set the scene for the reader when you are writing a novel. You're all they've got. And so you need to describe what things look like, feel like, smell like, all that sensory information. And you also have to describe what the characters, their internal monologue, what they're thinking and what they're feeling. In a screenplay, all that sensory information and the internal thoughts and feelings of the characters are all, they're all accomplished by the actors, by the performance, by costume design, by the set design, by the director and the cameraman choosing the angles, by the editor, by the music. So it's the main thing for me was that sensory information which you have to put in, and those internal. A novel is a much more interior experience, I think. Yeah. And
do you have a writing routine? I know you said you've got a baby, so that makes routines difficult.
It does.
But how do you go about writing a 400 and something page novel, and doing screenplays?
I give him the routine, but that's my baby. But he can't read, so
and he can't write.
I ascribe to the mantra: don't get it right, get it written. It's much easier to go back and edit something that you've already written rather than stare at a blank page and try to write something perfect first time. So what I do is I just say to myself, well, if you've got say 100,000 words to write, and you've got 4 months, and in those 4 months you've got 100 days of actual work, then you write 1,000 words a day. Don't worry if they're rubbish, because some of them will be rubbish, but some of them will probably be okay. But once you've got to that 100,000 words, then you can go back and worry about if it's rubbish. So don't get it right, get it written. That's my routine.
A very good mantra. How is the screenplay coming along? And if you had a Hollywood budget to cast it, living or dead actors, who are they going to be?
Oh, that's a great question. It's where are we at? So I guess we're probably at like maybe the second draft. It's gone to the director, Alyssa Down, who is an Australian as well. And she has given her notes. We've talked and written. She's happy with it. So now it's with the producers, and the producers will give their notes. And then once they're happy, it will go on to the studio, and then we'll start casting. And if we had unlimited budget, we did actually pitch a few actors to the studio, to Amazon, just to suggest to them what the tone of the movie would be. We pitched Saoirse Ronan, who's the Irish actress, a wonderful actress, and Brie Larson, who's an American, but hopefully she can do a Renee Zellweger like in Bridget Jones. She was Captain Marvel, I think. She's brilliant. And Jodie Comer we pitched as well, who is the assassin in Killing Eve.
Killing Eve,
yes. So that's sort of the kind of actresses that we were going for. So we're going for Oscar winners.
You are, I was going to say. They're all pretty high profile. Yeah. That sounds very exciting. And is there a time frame that is put on that, or is it just all waiting, like writing often is?
Yeah. I mean, it's filmmaking, I always describe it, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So you're rushing to get something written, and then you send it, and the people are going, where is it? And then you send it off to them, and then you don't hear from them for a month or whatever. So it's going at a good pace, which is, it might take sort of 6 months to develop the script, and then you go on to the next process, the casting. But the one thing that might hold us up is COVID.
Yeah.
It's really, they've really had a tough time of it over there in the UK, which is where it would be shot. The production has started up, but it stops and starts and stops and starts. So look, fingers crossed, we'll get something.
And we'll be seeing you on the red carpet.
Yeah.
Outside the Hollywood Theatre where they hold the Oscars. Perfect.
Yeah.
And just the last question from me before we open up to audience. What's next for you in terms of novels? Are you seeding any ideas?
I've got a couple of ideas. I haven't really, once I've finished the screenplay process, I'll sit down and have a proper look. But yeah, I'll definitely be starting book 3 this year. Yeah.
Fabulous. Any thoughts of turning Secrets My Father Kept into a screenplay? Is that something you consciously do when you write? Are you? I presume you write visually.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've always got it in my mind. I feel like you were describing it as a saga before. I feel like if it was to go to the screen, it would be a miniseries.
Yeah.
You know, maybe like four parts or 6 parts or 8 parts long. That way you get to show the 2 timelines. You get to show the 1918 timeline, 1939, and you get to see the characters develop. So yes, fingers crossed, watch this space.
Yes. Thank you. I'm wondering if any of our guests have any questions. You can unmute if you want to ask them or write them in the chat. Nobody's been brave enough so far. Maybe you answered all of their questions.
Possibly.
Can I just ask a question? Which do you prefer, novel writing or screenwriting?
Oh, that's a great question, Claire. There's pros and cons to both. Screenwriting or TV writing, which a lot of the stuff in Australia is what you do is you, like say you're working on Offspring or McLeod's Daughters or something, you sit around a table with maybe like 5 or 6 other writers and you come up with the ideas for all the episodes in the series. And then you all go off on your own and you might write 1 or 2 episodes each. And then you come back and you give each other notes and the process goes in that way. So it has this lovely sort of collegiate atmosphere. It's a lot of fun, sharing ideas. But the con is that these ideas, these characters, you don't own them. And at the end of the day, you're writing what you have been told to write. And hopefully if you're working on a good show, what you're being told to write is very good and very funny or very clever or very dramatic. But sometimes you can feel like you're writing, it can feel like hack work if you're working on a show that's not that great. So those are the pros and cons of TV writing or screenwriting. And then novel writing, well, it's the complete opposite because it's just you. And you can write whatever you want. And you can write anything that you want can happen to the characters that you have created yourself. The downside is that's very lonely. It's just you. And there's really nobody else to sort of spring off until you get to the editing process and the lovely editors and publishers come along.
Very good. What's your favourite Jane Austen novel then?
That's a great question. So my favourite Jane Austen novel is Persuasion. I read Emma and Pride and Prejudice when I was a teenager, 15, 16, I think, and loved them for they were so clever and so funny and so timeless. And I feel embarrassed to say I only read Persuasion when I was researching Jane and Love. And it's such a sad book and it's such a beautiful book. It's the last book that she wrote completely before she died. And I think it's a writer at the height of her powers who is also maybe a little bit tired of the brilliant stuff that she was writing when she was younger. And it's really a writer looking back on their life and maybe regretting a little some of the decisions they made or some of the decisions they were forced to make. And I really feel like it's the real Jane. And I say that in Jane. Yeah.
Very good.
Hi, I had a question, Rachel. Hi, it's Beverly.
Hi, Beth.
Hi. I have really, this burning question I had that I wanted to hear you talk about Ben and Maria, although I suddenly got cold feet because I thought I didn't want you to give away any spoilers if you were trying to keep back. But there is this wonderful, I think there's so many heartbreaking and sort of shocking moments. And one, when I was reading this book, the shocking moment for me was when Maria makes a decision about what she's going to do to be with Ben. Are you able to talk about that, or is that giving too much away?
No, I think we can talk about that. Yeah.
So my question was really, what was the decision behind that to give her that decision that she makes, that she is in 1939 going to convert to Judaism? And I remember my heart actually just leapt in my mouth with, with our knowledge, and she has that lack of knowledge, and we do. What made you make that choice for her?
That's a great question, Bev. It's the ultimate sort of dramatic irony, isn't it? Because we know what the horrible fate that was waiting for Jewish people after once World War II blew up Europe. And in my research, when I was talking with my Polish teacher, he said to me, nobody predicted the Holocaust. We look back on it now and we think how stupid we were not to see this, but people weren't walking around thinking that 6 million people were going to be murdered. And so that was important for me to show that in Poland in 1939, nobody thought that this was going to happen. And so, but it adds for us as the reader to see that this is such a reckless thing for Marie to do. But I thought that was also a great way to illustrate her character, because she is so headstrong, and she's 2 feet in the whole time, and she's brave, and she's in love, and so she was always going to do it. She was always going to convert to be with him.
The ultimate in romance.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? There's a comment in the chat that says that from Susan, who says she's really enjoyed listening to you today. And I think
Thanks.
If there are no more questions, we might end on that lovely comment, because I think we all share that. You have been a joy to listen to. And I would, if the audience hasn't read either of the books, then pick them up. They're available at the libraries or your local bookstores. They are fabulous. And we very much look forward to seeing the Hollywood production of Jane in Love, and all of the awards that go to screenwriters and actresses in hopefully not too distant future. Thank you very much for your time. We have recorded this, so you can watch it all again when we get that uploaded to our YouTube channel. But yes, thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks everyone for coming. Thank you. Bye.